A hiss of decompression tore through the silence, and the world swam into focus for Elias Ward. He was weightless, suspended in a cylinder of frost-stained glass, pale tendrils of vapor curling around his face as the pod systems groaned awake. His breath caught. The air tasted sterile, metallic. Lights flickered overhead, strobing the cramped chamber in harsh pulses of white. A voice, calm, mechanical, spoke from everywhere at once. Cryostasis disengaged. Commander Elias Ward, confirm consciousness. His throat was raw, the words rasping out. I'm here. A soft chime acknowledged his response, followed by the rhythmic hum of machinery coming to life. He pushed himself forward, stepping out onto the cold metal deck. The room was unfamiliar, all hard edges and utilitarian panels, the kind of design born from desperation rather than elegance. His mind felt sluggish, burdened by fragments of memory that wouldn't quite connect. Red skies, the sound of rain striking ash, faces lit by emergency lights. The voice returned. Mission parameters uploading. Stand by. He steadied himself against the wall, staring at a black, glassy panel as it flashed a sequence of symbols before resolving into a simple truth. Asterisk Earth viability threshold breached. Population collapse imminent. Asterisk. The memories sharpened. Meetings in bunker-like rooms beneath the Capitol. The bitter taste of recycled air. An image projected against a concrete wall. A dying sun, its light warped by something unseen. He remembered the tension, the arguments, the resignation etched into every face but his own. Humanity's last hope, they had called it. A mission with no return path. The panel shifted to a schematic. A vessel long and narrow, armored in overlapping plates, its engine core bright with stored energy. Hail Mary, the nameplate read. You are aboard the interstellar craft Hail Mary, the voice explained. Primary objective. Reach Epsilon Eridani and identify a viable energy solution for planetary restoration. Failure to execute will result in extinction-level event for human species. The words landed without ceremony, but the weight of them pressed into his chest. It was one thing to accept this in a meeting. It was another to wake to it alone. How long have I been under? He asked. 2 years, 8 months, 13 days ship time. You are now within optimal acceleration corridor. He moved down the narrow corridor, hand brushing the wall to steady himself. The ship felt unfinished. Exposed wiring snaked through open panels. Bulkheads bore welding scars. No excess weight, no comforts. Just the bare minimum to keep a man alive long enough to try the impossible. Through a small viewport, he caught sight of the void. The stars were sharp here, unblinking, cruel in their beauty. Somewhere out there was the problem he was meant to solve. Somewhere far behind was everything he'd ever known. He paused at a recessed console, fingers tracing its cold surface. The mission's data core was locked tight, most of it tagged restricted until target system entry. They didn't trust him with everything at once, not out of suspicion, but because too much truth could break a man before the work began. The voice spoke again, softer this time. Commander Ward, you were selected based on psychological resilience, problem-solving under extreme duress, and operational experience in deep space conditions. No other candidate achieved comparable survival metrics. It wasn't flattery. It was a fact presented like the ship's oxygen level. Neutral, absolute. A flicker of movement in the viewport caught his eye. Not movement exactly, but the subtle distortion of light, as though something invisible had passed between him and the stars. He leaned closer, squinting into the black. It was gone. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps not. His stomach tightened. The memory fragments aligned in new ways. Scientists whispering in corridors, data feeds hastily shut down when he entered the room, an unspoken understanding that the why of this mission wasn't just about restoring Earth. Something else had driven them to launch the Hail Mary ahead of schedule. Set course confirmation, the voice prompted. He swallowed, thumb hovering over the console's initiate key. If I fail, There is no second mission, the voice finished. For a moment, he let the silence hang. He imagined the streets of his childhood, now buried under choking dust. He thought of the faces in those underground chambers, watching him as the pod door sealed. And he thought of the unblinking stars outside, cold and patient. He pressed his thumb to the panel. Trajectory locked, the voice said. Acceleration sequence beginning. The deck vibrated beneath his boots. Somewhere deep in the vessel, the engines roared to life. A faint shudder traveled through the hull as the Hail Mary surged forward, cutting through the dark. Elias exhaled slowly, gaze fixed on the endless void ahead. Whatever waited at the far end of this journey, be it salvation or the truth behind their desperation, he was now the only man who would face it. And if he didn't make it back, there would be no one left to tell the story. Days bled into weeks, measured not by sunsets but by the steady rhythm of shipboard routines. Elias logged his thoughts into the mission recorder each morning, his voice the only human sound in the vast expanse. He spoke of small things to keep his mind anchored. His father's stubborn hands fixing a broken watch, the metallic tang of rain on the steel roofs of the colony domes, the way laughter used to echo through a crowded room. The Hail Mary answered only with the hum of life support systems and the occasional chime from the ship's AI, its tone unchanging. Repairs became his meditation. A micrometeor strike in week 14 tore a gash across the starboard hull, venting atmosphere from an unused maintenance bay. Elias suited up without hesitation, his breath loud in the helmet, each exhale frosting the edge of his visor. Outside, the ship looked like a scarred blade, cutting through the silence of space. His tether drifted in slow arcs as he worked, gloved fingers steady despite the cold that seeped into his bones. The damage was sealed, but the impact left a faint vibration in the deck that he could feel at night. It was during one of these quiet maintenance shifts that the anomaly appeared. The sensors had been sweeping for high-velocity debris when a faint ping echoed across the console, an artificial signal, weak and intermittent. Elias frowned, adjusting the filters until the readings sharpened into a distinct pattern. It wasn't random. Something or someone was out there. He altered course by a fraction, letting the ship's long-range optics focus on the source. The image resolved slowly, a battered vessel smaller than the Hail Mary, tumbling in a slow, uneven spin. Its hull was dented and scorched, a section near the bow split open like a wound. Dim lights flickered along its spine, their rhythm erratic. The signal pulsed again, faint but deliberate. Against the AI's clinical protest about resource expenditure, Elias brought the ship alongside the wreck. Close up, the vessel looked even more pitiful. Scratches in the plating marked with symbols he didn't recognize, the metal scored by weapons fire. Through a jagged breach, he glimpsed movement. Inside, the air was thin, stale with the scent of oxidized metal. His helmet lights swept across the cabin, catching on a figure slumped against the bulkhead. It was male, or at least the proportions suggested so, though not human. Its frame was larger, the limbs corded with muscle, skin patterned with faint ridges that caught the light. Two deep-set eyes blinked open, reflecting a dull silver hue. The being made a sound, a guttural vibration that resonated in the chest more than the ears. Elias crouched, hands raised to show no harm. He tapped the translator module at his wrist, letting it scan and process the vocal tones. The device stuttered, then produced halting words. Help, or leave. Elias hesitated only long enough to glance at the damage along the alien's side. A deep gash seeping dark fluid, the edges crusted over. He pulled a field kit from his belt, working with efficient, deliberate movements. The alien's breathing steadied under his touch, though the silver eyes remained locked on him, unblinking. Elias Ward, he said, tapping his chest. Human. The alien rasped a sound, then after a pause managed. Rintak. With the worst of the bleeding controlled, Elias examined the wreck systems. The power core was failing, life support running on dwindling reserves. Rintak's gaze followed him, expression unreadable. The translator crackled again. Why help? Because leaving you here isn't an option, Elias replied, sealing another breach in the hull. Not for me. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint groan of the ship's frame. Slowly, Rintak lifted a hand, gripping Elias's forearm, not in restraint, but in something that felt like acknowledgement. They worked in uneasy partnership, transferring what remained of Rintak's power systems into portable units for the journey back to the Hail Mary. The alien moved with a limping determination, his height forcing him to stoop in the narrow corridors. When they reached the docking corridor, Rintak paused to glance at the stars beyond the viewport. Hunter, the translator murmured. Elias frowned. Hunter. Rintak's voice was low, but the word carried weight. It eats suns. The translator lagged, searching for context, but Rintak was already moving toward the airlock. The look in his eyes was enough. This wasn't superstition, it was survival. By the time they sealed the Hail Mary's hatch behind them, Elias felt the weight of those words settling in his mind. A predator that consumed stars. If it existed, and if it was near. The mission parameters were already obsolete. The problem he'd been sent to solve might only be the shadow of a much larger threat. The AI's voice broke the quiet. Unidentified life form aboard. Recommend quarantine protocols. Elias ignored it, steadying Rintak as they stepped into the ship's dim corridor. He's not my prisoner, Elias said. He's my crew. Rintak didn't react outwardly, but there was a flicker in those silver eyes. A shift that might have been trust, or perhaps just the recognition that for now, their survival was bound together. The days that followed were filled with the quiet rhythm of necessity. Elias repaired what could be salvaged from Rintak's wreck and integrated alien technology into the Hail Mary systems. The ship's corridors were now lined with unfamiliar alloys and faintly luminescent conduits, their glow a subtle reminder of the partnership that had formed in the cold vacuum of space. Communication remained halting, the translators stuttering through differences in syntax and tone, but they had enough to share essentials. Coordinates, mechanical processes, fragments of personal history. Through those fragments, Elias pieced together the truth. Rintak's people were scattered remnants of a once dominant civilization, their homeworld reduced to a frozen husk after the approach of what he called the Devourer. It was not a fleet nor a weapon, but a living entity. An interstellar predator that consumed the energy of entire stars, leaving behind only drifting debris and dead planets. Its movements were slow but inevitable, and Rintak had been part of a desperate mission to find a means of stopping it. His crippled vessel was one of many that had never returned. Elias listened in silence, his mind calculating distances and trajectories. If the Devourer was real, and if its path curved toward Sol, then Earth had less time than even the most dire projections suggested. The original mission, the one engraved in the Hail Mary's directives, felt suddenly small in scope. Restoring Earth's energy systems would mean nothing if the sun itself became prey. Their first glimpse of it came sooner than Elias expected. The ship's long-range optics caught a distortion at the edge of a red dwarf system, light bending unnaturally, as though drawn toward a single point. When the image resolved, his breath caught. It was enormous, its form barely visible against the dark, like a shadow sculpted from space itself. Tendrils of semi-transparent matter extended for thousands of kilometers, coiling and retracting as it fed on the star. The star's corona twisted inward, streams of plasma vanishing into the creature's vast core. Even from this distance, the violence of the process was unmistakable. Rintak stood beside him at the viewport, his expression unreadable but his body tense. It hunts, the translator murmured. Elias felt the urge to look away, but forced himself to keep watching. Fear was only useful if it sharpened the mind. Can it be stopped? Rintak's answer was slow. Not by running. In the hours that followed, the two men worked through possibilities. Rintak's people had tried direct assaults, missiles, singularity weapons, even attempts to disrupt its feeding pattern with artificial stellar flares. All had failed. The creature adapted, absorbing the energy or dispersing the attacks before they could inflict damage. Elias proposed something different: to turn the Hail Mary's reactor into a trap, overloading it to release a concentrated burst of matter-antimatter energy at point-blank range. The idea was reckless, almost certainly fatal for the one deploying it, but it was the only method that exploited the one trait Rintak admitted the creature had: curiosity toward high-energy signatures. They began adapting the plan in grim silence. Alien capacitors were wired into human systems, containment fields reinforced with scavenged hull plating. Each modification was a step toward a final confrontation neither could fully predict. The work was punctuated by moments of strange camaraderie. Rintak, for all his imposing presence, struggled with the finer dexterity required for human tools, and Elias found himself wordlessly guiding the alien's large hands through delicate alignments. In return, Rintak taught him to read the faint tremors in a ship's structure as signs of stress or weakness, knowledge born from a lifetime in deep space. When the final calibration was set, Elias stepped back from the reactor housing, the heat of the core seeping through the bulkhead. "Once we start the overload, we can't stop it," he said. Rintak inclined his head. "Then we do not start, until it is close enough to feel us breathe." They tested the lure by simulating an overload at low power. The creature reacted instantly, its tendrils shifting, its slow drift altering toward them. Even at a fraction of output, it had noticed. The sight made the skin between Elias's shoulders tighten. But the test also cost them. The energy spike damaged one of the auxiliary coolant lines, and repairs took nearly an entire cycle. When it was done, the ship's AI reported the Predator had altered its trajectory toward their location, closing the gap with unnerving speed. They retreated to the dark side of a barren moon to prepare. The Predator's approach was visible now without optics, a faint dimming of the stars in its path. Elias sat in the pilot's chair, watching its slow advance. Rintak stood behind him, silent. "This is going to work," Elias said, more to himself than to his companion. Rintak's voice was low but steady through the translator. "If it does not, there will be no one left to try again." The truth of that settled between them like a physical weight. Elias gripped the controls, the hum of the reactor beneath his boots a reminder of both their weapon and their mortality. The Hail Mary was ready, the lure primed, and the Devourer was coming. All that remained was to decide which of them would stay at the helm when the time came to trigger it. The Predator loomed, its vast silhouette blotting out swathes of the starfield, a living eclipse that swallowed light itself. The Hail Mary shuddered under the gravitational tides of its presence, every bolt and plate groaning as if the ship sensed what was coming. Elias stood at the helm, jaw set, the reactor's deep thrum vibrating through his bones. Behind him, Rintak adjusted the alien capacitors, his movements precise despite the tension that saturated the air. "Now," Rintak said, his voice low yet carrying the weight of finality. Elias engaged the lure, the ship's power output spiking to impossible levels. The readout screamed warnings: overheat, containment breach imminent, yet he pushed harder, feeding more energy into the core. The Predator reacted instantly. Tendrils unfurled like solar flares, curling toward them, drawn by the concentrated beacon of power. It moved with terrifying grace, a leviathan gliding through the void, its sheer scale dwarfing their vessel into irrelevance. The Hail Mary's lights flickered, systems straining. Elias could feel heat building through the deck plates, sweat beading along his hairline. The AI's voice droned emergency protocols, but he silenced it. All that mattered was timing. Too early, and the blast wouldn't reach its core. Too late, and there would be nothing left to detonate. Rintak stepped forward, placing a heavy, clawed hand on Elias's shoulder. "You must go," he said. Elias didn't look away from the Predator's advancing mass. "We both know someone has to stay to trigger it manually." "I have no world left," Rintak replied, voice quieter now. "You do. Your people still have a son." For a moment, Elias wanted to argue, to insist that they find another way, but the logic was unassailable. Rintak had already lost everything. Earth still had a chance. And that chance was tied to Elias surviving long enough to warn them. Without another word, Rintak moved to the helm. His massive form filled the command seat, the glow of the control interface casting alien light across his scaled features. Elias hesitated, then turned and headed for the escape pod bay. Each step felt heavier than the last, his boots dragging as if the ship itself resisted letting him go. Through the comms, Rintak's voice came, steady and unyielding. "When your people see the shadow in the stars, tell them it bleeds. And tell them it remembers who struck first." The pod hatch sealed behind him, the clamps releasing with a hiss. Through the small viewport, Elias saw the Hail Mary holding its ground as the Predator enveloped it. Tendrils curled around the ship like the arms of some ancient sea beast, drawing it into the creature's core. Then came the flash. It was not a simple explosion. It was a rupture in existence itself, a white-hot burst that seemed to tear the darkness apart. The shockwave hurled the pod into a tumbling spin, and Elias clung to the restraints as stars streaked past. Through the blur, he caught one last glimpse of the Predator recoiling, its tendrils spasming, fragments of its shadowed form shredding away into the void. When the light faded, there was only silence. No Hail Mary, no Rintak, just the distant glimmer of a wounded Leviathan drifting into the black. The pod system stabilized, orienting toward the nearest inhabited system. Elias slumped against the seat, chest tight. Rintak's final words echoed in his mind, a vow and a warning intertwined. As the stars inched closer, Elias began recording. He told the story exactly as it had happened, every detail of the Devourer, every desperate choice, every sacrifice. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the creature would heal, and when it did, it would remember. But so would humanity. And when that day came, they would not face it unprepared.